pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Mazdak Rezvani. He is the founder and CEO of a new startup called Shoppe AI. Many of you probably know him in the community as the individual who founded Chango, where he was CTO, which was co-founded, which was acquired a couple years ago by Rubicon Project, where he stayed on and was SVP of Engineering. Prior to that, he co-founded BubbleShare in 2005, which was ultimately acquired by Kaboose. And he's also served as engineering leader at Hot or Not, VP operations at Tall Tree Gaming. And today, Mazdak's going to cover a topic that's near and dear to everyone in the room, which is how to build strong teams. So with that, here you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A lot of great talks today. Actually, I'm glad there was a lot of talks on the more process, technical side of things because, my plan wasn't to go into any of that. And I think when I'm talking about building strong teams here, really what we're talking about is entire companies. Engineering is definitely sort of the hot topic today here, but one of the key, I think, problems is that sometimes engineering or any other departments think inside companies as silos. This is what engineering was, what marketing was, what finance wants. Really, if we start to think about companies as one entity, and that engineering is the business is engineering, I think we're going to have different perspectives and things. So I'm going to skip this because we already talked about it. So here's what I'm not going to talk about, although it's a bit of a lie, I mentioned them one by one, but we're not going to talk about food and beer and stuff. That doesn't build teams. That does nothing. Ping pong games, those are fun, but they don't build teams. We're not going to talk about process because we already talked about it today. That's great. We're not going to talk about development methodology. Those are not my area. But what I'm going to talk about is hopefully something that things that should really become, should be common sense, but sometimes they get lost in all of the details of everything we try to do in running a company. So, you could have the best process in the world, you could have all the smartest engineers in the world, you can have everything figured out from that aspect, and yet you look yourself in the mirror and say, why are we not succeeding? And I think the number one problem is mission. You gotta have a mission. People get behind the mission. That is a thing that makes strong teams stronger. If people don't believe in the mission, if people are not explaining the mission, if people think there's confusion at different levels in the organization, that causes failure. So you see this in different scenarios, especially I've been a part of a few acquisitions, and I've seen this happen in the early stages of the acquisition being complete. Because people are not accustomed to the new mission of the company, or they don't believe in it, or whatever, what was once a really strong, cohesive team turns into a mess. So I think mission is a big part of it. The mission has to come top down, right? It cannot be, not different departments can have different missions. Different groups can't, believe that you're doing different things. One group can't think that your mission is to change the world in this way, and the other group says no. Well, what we're really doing is this. It has to come top down. Sometimes we can't fix those problems. If you're part of an organization that has that problem, then kind of sorry, I don't have a don't have a solution for you. But if you do happen to be part of an organization that actually has a strong mission, and that mission is communicated from the CEO down, then that should make your job a lot easier. So I think that's one of the key things, and really goes hand in hand with that is the communication, right? So communication, so many different aspects of communication, but to start with is that communication of the mission, right? So putting it on the wall is a great way to do it. That's one way to do it, right? Definitely put it on the wall. That's nice, but that's not communication. That is just one thing you did. Communication is something that has to happen constantly. It has to be an experience that is it has to be repetitive. Like everything else in life, repetition is the thing that actually causes you to learn, right? So and communication has to happen at every layer. It has to be consistent, and it has to be across all parts of the organization, right? So for us at Chango, the way we did this was that we had the so-called management meetings with the C-level people at the top, and if we were not in agreement about what the next whatever week, month, quarter, whatever year mission in life was, then we had to stay in that meeting. But once we agreed on something, we would all go off on our own ways. Sales and marketing were in New York and San Francisco and Chicago. They weren't even in Toronto. So the CRO had to go convey the mission in his own words and his own style to the sales team and the marketing team. I had to go back to the engineering team and communicate the mission in the same way, but of course with my own style mixed into it, and same with every other part of the organization. That is key, and when that if that falls apart, then problems start. And so communication also has kind of another counterpart to it, which we've talked about in some of the other talks. That is transparency, right? So you're a public company. You can't talk about every single number. You can't talk about the details of what's coming up. That's just the law, right? But if you're a private company, well, you don't have that problem, so you can kind of try to be more transparent in that sense. So if we go back to the communication topic again for a second, what I used to do personally at Chango was that I would have monthly engineering town halls that would always happen. It was the last Thursday of every month, and I would make sure they would happen. And everybody would gather around in a room much like this, and I would talk about what's going on in the business and have them ask me questions about it. It wasn't a talk about technology at all. Actually, technology was almost never mentioned on its own. It was always about, hey, how's the business doing? How do we contribute to that success? How do we contribute to that failure? How are the things that are happening in sales related to the things that are happening in engineering? Why is product going in this direction? How's the market doing? What are the market forces telling us, and how are we supposed to react to them? And this is why we're changing direction. This is why we're throwing out this project. This is why this new project is coming on board, right? So, and this is why last month of hard work is just going out the door. Don't think of it as a bad thing. Think of it as that now we're in the service of responding to market forces or customer demand or whatever it happens to be, and that is what the job of the team is. And the only way they're going to get behind that is they have to be told what's happening in the world and not just say, look, decision has been made at the highest level, we're now throwing out this project, enough, back to work, right? So first, communicate, talk, and I talked about numbers until the very last moment. We got acquired by a public company, couldn't do that anymore. But until then, I would say, hey, here's the quarter goals, whatever happened, this is what happened. Hey, the West Coast region missed their goals. You know why? Because West Coast, media buyers are doing something different than the East Coast media buyers. So try to explain that to them. Hey, we have a gap in this department, and this is how we're going to fill it. Here's how our failure to deliver something caused that problem. Here's why this new feature caused us to sell more to this one client. So all of these things really help the team get behind the entire business, not just the one piece they're working on. You cannot invite, when you're 5 people, you can invite everybody to every meeting and really get that really deep knowledge of what the business is doing. But when you have an engineering team of 50 or 100, you're not going to be able to invite the junior engineers to the management meeting and say, hey, I want you to be part of the team. So how are you going to make them feel part of the team? Well, that becomes the job of the CTO and the VP engineering or whatever, and that's that's a big part of it. And I think so. Let me just before, yeah, okay. So I only have this to talk about. So part of that is this topic that came up quite a bit in the previous panel, which is trust, right? So the CEO trusts the CTO. Hopefully that's the case, and then the CTO should trust the VPs that are on the rim if there are VPs. And again, depends on the size of the organization. Sometimes you are the CTO, and then all the engineers report to you. But most importantly, trust has to exist at every level because once the communication is done, whether that's communicating OKRs, communicating company mission, communicating numbers and how you're doing against them, you want that trust level there to allow for things to flow naturally inside teams and then flow back up. This is where structure comes into play, right? Organizational structure is a very complex topic, and sometimes always business people talk. Organizational structure is key to everything that happens in a company, and it cannot be isolated. You can't say that organizational structure does not affect engineering. How a sales team is structured, believe me, has at least an indirect impact on how engineering works and what they do, right? So I think, generally speaking, though, I'm going to give credit to a guy named Matt Sardina, who's got a consulting company called Architecture, spelled there. we spent some time with him, and he really kind of opened my eyes in some ways in terms of this particular topic. And the key to organizational structure is that you have to have as many levels that are necessary and no more, right? The moment you start introducing levels and you're introducing middle managers and stuff like that, that's when things start to fall apart. That's when it becomes about the process and not about getting stuff done, right? So the three key things to take away from organizational structure are accountability, responsibility, and control. This topic actually kind of came up, I think, as Boris mentioned it. These three things are key to having a good, healthy structure. Accountability means that every individual should know who they're accountable to, right? For me, it was simple. I was accountable to the CEO, right? My VPs were accountable to me, so forth, right? If you have multiple bosses or perception of multiple bosses, there's something definitely wrong there. This is where matrix structures can cause massive, massive pain, right? So now sometimes it's out of your kind of domain of power, but I feel like in a strong technology or product company, the CTO is quite frankly probably the most powerful person in the company in terms of influencing the CEO. So if we're seeing a matrix organization get in the way of people understanding who they're really and truly accountable to, we should probably speak up in that regard. Responsibility and control go hand in hand. So now I know who I'm accountable to. Well, what are my responsibilities? Those have to be very clear, right? It can't be ambiguous. Oh, well, am I the QA lead, or am I just another QA guy? Am I responsible for writing code or just testing the UI? Well, you need to know you don't know what you're responsible for. And last but not least, hand in hand, you have to have the control to execute that, right? So if you're the team lead responsible for releasing the iOS version, and that's your responsibility, and you know who you're accountable to, if you're not given the control to actually do it, then something breaks. If you have to go ask for permission every time you want to release something that you are the expert in that domain, you're given the control and the responsibility to do, then if you don't have the control, then that also breaks things. I think putting all of these things together really makes for a very strong organizational structure. And so once in a while, you have to just get our, sort of head out of the code, head out of the engineering processes, and kind of look at it a little bit bigger picture. Look at the whole company, and have those very tough conversations with our CEO, with the CEO party. Now I've kind of hung up my CTO robes. Now I'm CEO of a new startup. I honestly feel that the responsibilities are not even that different, especially as big engineering organizations. As you grow, you're almost doing almost the same thing, and that is making sure that the organizational structure, the processes that you have, the communication styles, the mission, all of these things are aligning for the business. Because at the end of the day, that's the thing we're working on. We're having, as somebody was just mentioning, having like the most beautiful, immaculate code in one part of the system that nobody ever touches or doesn't do anything meaningful to the business is not a goal. That's just something that you do to waste your time. What you got to do is you got to really understand the things that affect the business the most have to be all aligned, and you got to get behind it and make it happen. Anyway, I think that is the last kind of formal slide I had. I'm actually more interested in seeing what people have to say and questions and so forth.